The coffee pot rattled on the stove, its frantic trembling a poor imitation of the blizzard's fury outside. Clara Benson barely noticed. For the past hour, the Montana wind had been her only companion, its mournful howl a familiar soundtrack to her solitude. It was a sound she had come to accept, much like the ache in her bones that seemed to settle deeper with each passing winter. A year had passed since Thomas's death, yet the silence he left behind remained a physical presence in their small cabin, as tangible as the scent of pine smoke and drying herbs. She ran a cloth over the worn surface of the pine table, her movements methodical, a habit born of a life stripped down to its essentials. Wake, tend the animals, chop wood, mend, cook, sleep. The rhythm was a shield against memory, a bulwark against the grief that still ambushed her in the quiet moments. The homestead was all she had left of him, 100 acres of stubborn earth and endless sky that Thomas had poured his dreams into. Now, it was just a place to survive. A sudden, violent pounding on the door shattered the fragile peace. It wasn't the tentative knock of a lost traveler. It was the desperate, frantic drumming of someone at the end of their rope. Clara froze, her hand tightening around the dishcloth. No one came this far into the wilderness, especially not in a storm that had already swallowed the trails whole. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Thomas's old Winchester rifle rested above the hearth, loaded and ready, a grim necessity in this untamed land. The pounding came again, followed by a thin, desperate cry that was nearly stolen by the wind. It was the sound of a child. Clara's resolve broke. Throwing the dishcloth onto the table, she moved to the door, her hand hesitating over the heavy iron bolt. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice rough from disuse. The only answer was a muffled sob and the sound of a body slumping against the wooden planks. Taking a deep breath, Clara drew the bolt and pulled the heavy door inward. A blast of wind and snow drove into the cabin, extinguishing the lantern by the door and plunging the room into flickering firelight. Sprawled on her doorstep was a figure no older than 16, a girl, half conscious and dusted in a thick coat of snow like a fallen statue. Her face was ashen, her lips tinged with blue, and she clutched a worn leather satchel to her chest as if it were her last earthly possession. "Help, please," the girl whispered, her eyes fluttering open for a brief moment before rolling back into her head. Clara's instincts, honed by years of frontier life and the bitter experience of nursing a dying husband, took over. She dragged the girl's slight frame into the cabin, the snow melting in a puddle on the floorboards as she bolted the door against the storm's renewed assault. The girl was impossibly light, a collection of sharp angles and shivering limbs beneath a threadbare coat. Clara carried her to the hearth, laying her gently on the bearskin rug Thomas had cured the summer before he fell ill. She worked quickly, stripping away the frozen layers of clothing, her hands gentle but efficient. Beneath the coat, the girl's dress was thin and torn, offering little protection against the elements. Her body was a roadmap of hardship. Bruises, old and new, shadowed her arms, and a long, faded scar traced a line above her eyebrow. As Clara removed the satchel, the girl's fingers, though numb with cold, tightened their grip for a moment before going limp. For the next hour, Clara fought to bring the girl back from the brink. She wrapped her in warm blankets, chafed her frozen hands and feet, and forced sips of warm, sweet broth between her chapped lips. The girl drifted in and out of consciousness, her mind lost in a fevered haze. She muttered fragments of words that made little sense. The old man, a promise, have to keep it safe. Her eyes, when they opened, were a startling shade of blue, wide with a terror that seemed to see things beyond the four walls of the cabin. Once, her gaze fixed on the rifle above the hearth. "He'll find me," she whimpered, a tear tracing a clean path through the grime on her cheek. "He always finds me." "You're safe here," Clara said, her voice softer than she intended. "The storm will keep everyone away." As the girl finally succumbed to an exhausted, feverish sleep, Clara turned her attention to the satchel. It was old, the leather cracked and stained, its buckle held together with a piece of twine. Curiosity warred with her sense of propriety. The girl had clutched it with such desperation, guarding it even in her delirium. Hesitantly, Clara untied the twine and lifted the flap. Inside, nestled amongst a few meager possessions, a small, carved wooden bird, a tarnished locket, and a spare set of worn clothes, was a folded piece of oilskin. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she unwrapped it. It was a map, hand-drawn on a tattered piece of parchment. The lines were faded, the ink blurred in places, depicting a rugged stretch of mountains that looked vaguely familiar. A series of cryptic symbols, a crooked tree, a trio of jagged rocks, a waterfall, marked a winding path. At the top of the highest peak, a crudely drawn skull was sketched, and beneath it, in shaky lettering, were the words, Sorrow's Peak. Clara stared at the map, a cold knot forming in her stomach. This was no simple drawing. It felt dangerous, a secret not meant to be unearthed. What had this child stumbled into? She remembered the girl's delirious words. He knows I have it. This map was the reason she was running, the reason she had thrown herself at the mercy of a stranger in the middle of a blizzard. The cabin, once her sanctuary, suddenly felt exposed. The vast wilderness that had offered her solace now seemed to hold 1,000 unseen threats. She thought of Thomas, of the suddenness with which he had been taken from her. One day he was strong, splitting logs with practiced ease. The next, he was fighting for breath, a fever consuming him from the inside out. She had nursed him for 2 weeks, her knowledge of herbs and remedies proving useless against the swift, brutal illness. That loss had hollowed her out, leaving behind a profound fear of attachment. She had sworn to keep her heart locked away, to never again risk the agony of losing someone she cared for. Yet, as she looked at the vulnerable girl sleeping by her fire, she felt an unwelcome stir of empathy. Taking her in had been an impulse, a simple act of human decency. But this map, this secret, changed everything. It invited a danger she was ill-equipped to face. She carefully refolded the map, wrapped it back in its oilskin sheath, and tucked it deep inside her sewing basket, buried beneath spools of thread and scraps of fabric. For now, it would be her secret. The blizzard raged through the night and into the next day, a relentless curtain of white that cut them off from the world. Clara tended to the girl, whose fever finally broke late in the afternoon. She woke slowly, her blue eyes blinking in confusion as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings. The rough-hewn walls, the stone hearth, the woman watching her from a rocking chair. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice a hoarse whisper. "You're at my homestead," Clara said gently. "You collapsed on my doorstep last night. I'm Clara Benson." The girl pushed herself up on one elbow, her gaze darting around the room before landing on the empty space beside her. "My satchel," she said, panic rising in her voice. "Where is it?" "It's safe," Clara assured her, pointing to where it rested on a nearby stool. "Nothing has been touched." Relief washed over the girl's face, and she sank back into the blankets. "Thank you," she murmured. I thought he caught up to me." She looked at Clara, her eyes old with a fear that no child should know. "My name is Lily." Before Clara could ask the question swirling in her mind, who was she running from? What did the map mean? Lily's eyes widened, her gaze fixed on the cabin's single window. The storm had lessened slightly, the wind's howl softening to a low moan, and through the swirling snow, a faint, rhythmic sound was becoming audible. Thump, thump, thump. It was the sound of a horse, moving slowly but deliberately through the deep snow, coming toward the cabin. Lily's breath hitched, a small, terrified sound in the quiet room. "He's here," she whispered, her body trembling. "He found me." Clara's blood ran cold. She moved to the window, peering through a small clearing in the frost-covered glass. A dark figure on horseback was slowly emerging from the curtain of snow, a silhouette of looming dread. The rider stopped just beyond the fence line, a silent, menacing statue against the white landscape. Then came a heavy, authoritative knock on the door, a sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the cabin and Clara's carefully guarded solitude. The knock came again, louder this time, a sound of implacable authority that demanded a response. Lily scrambled from the rug, her eyes wild with terror, and huddled behind the rocking chair, making herself as small as possible. Clara's mind raced. Running was impossible. The blizzard was a cage, and now the wolf was at the door. Her hand instinctively went to the hearth, her fingers brushing against the cold, familiar stock of the Winchester. "Stay quiet," she mouthed to Lily, before turning to face the door. She took a deep, steadying breath, smoothed the front of her apron, and called out, "Who is it?" "Sheriff Miller," a gruff voice boomed from the other side. "Open up." Mrs. Benson. Official business. Sheriff Miller. Relief and a new, colder dread washed over Clara in equal measure. It wasn't the man Lily feared, but the law was little comfort in these parts, especially when wielded by a man like Jedediah Miller. He was a man whose justice was as harsh and unforgiving as the land itself, a man Thomas had openly distrusted, citing his quick temper and his unsettlingly close relationship with the saloon's more unsavory patrons. Clara unbolted the door and opened it just enough to see the sheriff's imposing frame filling the space. Snow clung to his thick mustache and the fur collar of his greatcoat. His eyes, small and hard like pebbles, swept over her before moving to scan the cabin's interior. "Afternoon, Sheriff," Clara said, her voice betraying none of the fear churning in her gut. "This is an unexpected visit. I thought the trails were impassable." "They are for most," Miller said, pushing his way inside without invitation and bringing a swirl of snow with him. "But I'm looking for someone. A runaway girl. Seen anyone matching that description?" His gaze fell on the discarded blankets by the fire, the extra bowl on the table. Clara's heart seized. This was it, the moment her life, and Lily's, would pivot on her next words. She thought of Thomas, of his quiet integrity, and found a strength she didn't know she possessed. "As a matter of fact, I have," she said, her tone even. She stepped aside, gesturing toward the shadowy corner where Lily was hiding. "My cousin's girl, Lily. She arrived 2 days ago, just before the storm hit. Came down with a fever on the journey. I've been nursing her." Miller's eyes narrowed, his suspicion a palpable force in the small room. He strode over to the rocking chair, his heavy boots thudding on the floorboards. Lily flinched as he loomed over her, but to Clara's astonishment, the girl began to shiver violently, her teeth chattering. She pulled the blanket tighter around her, her eyes glassy and unfocused as she looked up at the sheriff. "Fever's got her something fierce," Clara added, moving to stand protectively near Lily. "She's been delirious on and off. I was just about to make her some more willow bark tea." The performance was flawless. Lily looked every bit the sick child, her fear perfectly mimicking the tremors of a high fever. Miller grunted, not entirely convinced. He let his gaze drift around the cabin, a slow, methodical search. He noted the single bed behind a curtain, the meager pantry, the stack of firewood. His eyes lingered for a moment on the sewing basket sitting beside Clara's chair. Clara's breath caught in her throat. The map, it was right there, hidden beneath a thin layer of fabric and thread. If he decided to search it, they were lost. She moved instinctively, picking up the basket as if to tidy it away. "The place is a mess, Sheriff. I've been so focused on caring for the child, I've let everything go." Miller's gaze followed the basket, but his attention was diverted by a small object on the floor near Lily's discarded coat. He bent down and picked up the small, carved wooden bird. "This hers?" he asked, turning it over in his thick fingers. Lily nodded weakly, her eyes fluttering as if fighting to stay open. "My pup, he made it for me," she whispered, her voice a fragile thread of sound. "Your pup," Miller repeated, his voice flat. "And where is he?" "He's gone," Clara interjected quickly. "Her mother passed last spring. He took a job with the railroad, laying track up north. Sent her to me for the winter, where she'd be safe." The lie came so easily it frightened her. Each word felt like a stone being laid, building a wall between them and the sheriff. But it was a fragile wall, one that could crumble with a single wrong move. Miller tossed the bird back onto the pile of clothes, his expression unreadable. "A lot of folks on the move these days," he said vaguely. He walked the perimeter of the room, peering behind the curtain to her sleeping area, checking the lock on the back door. The cabin felt impossibly small, each corner offering no real place to hide a secret. "This runaway I'm looking for," he continued, his back to them. "She's trouble. Stole something from her father and lit out. Her old man is a dangerous customer. He wants back what's his. It would be best for everyone if she were found." He turned back, his eyes pinning Clara with their intensity. "If you're lying to me, Clara, if you're harboring a fugitive, the trouble she's in will become your trouble." "Understand?" "I understand perfectly, Sheriff," Clara said, her voice steady. "But the only person I'm harboring is my own kin." He held her gaze for a long, uncomfortable moment, a silent battle of wills playing out in the firelit cabin. Clara didn't flinch. She thought of Lily's bruises, of the terror in her eyes, of the map that promised either fortune or death, and she held her ground. Finally, with another grunt, Miller seemed to accept her story, or at least the futility of challenging it for now. "See that you keep it that way," he said, moving toward the door. "This storm won't last forever. I'll be back to check on your cousin when the trail is cleared." He paused with his hand on the latch, a final, parting shot. "And tell the girl to be careful with her carving. Looks a lot like the handiwork of an outlaw I know named Silas Blackwood." He closed the door behind him, leaving a chilling silence in his wake. For a full minute, neither Clara nor Lily moved. The only sound was the crackling of the fire and the low moan of the wind. Then, the tension broke. Lily let out a shuddering sob, burying her face in the blanket. Clara sank into her rocking chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. Her hands were trembling, and a cold sweat slicked her skin. She had lied to the law. She, Clara Benson, who had never done a dishonest thing in her life, had constructed an elaborate fiction to protect a stranger. The consequences of that lie now loomed larger and more menacing than the blizzard outside. After a few moments, Lily's sobs subsided. She looked up, her blue eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and renewed fear. "He knows," she whispered. "He doesn't know for sure," Clara corrected, though her own conviction was shaky. "He suspects, but we bought ourselves some time." She rose and moved to the hearth, adding another log to the fire, the simple, physical act of comfort. "Lily," she said, her back still to the girl. "The sheriff mentioned a name, Silas Blackwood. Is that your father?" Lily nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "He's a bad man, Mrs. Benson. He's done terrible things." She hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. She looked directly at Clara, her expression pleading for understanding. "The sheriff, Miller, he wasn't just asking about me because it's his job." "What do you mean?" Clara asked, turning to face her. Lily took a deep, shaky breath. "Sheriff Miller," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "He rides with my father. He's part of the gang." The words settled in the space between them, heavy and suffocating. "He's part of the gang." The fire crackled, oblivious, casting dancing shadows that now seemed to writhe and threaten. For the first time since Thomas's death, Clara felt a fear so profound it was paralyzing. The storm that had been their shield was now a prison wall, trapping them with the chilling knowledge that the one person meant to uphold the law was the very man they needed to fear most. "How do you know?" Clara finally managed, her voice a dry rasp. She moved away from the door, putting the solid pine table between herself and the memory of the sheriff's presence. Lily, emboldened by her confession, pushed herself to her feet. The feigned weakness of moments ago was gone, replaced by a wiry tension, the posture of an animal that has lived its entire life on the edge of a trap. "I grew up around them," she said, her voice low and laced with a bitterness that didn't belong to a 16-year-old. "You learn to read the signs. The way Miller looked at my father, it wasn't with respect for the law. It was with deference. Like a dog waiting for his master's command." She began to pace the small confines of the cabin, her movements agitated. "I've seen him at our camp in the high country. He brings supplies, whiskey, ammunition. He warns my father when marshals are sniffing around. They call him their man in town." Clara sank into a chair, her mind struggling to process the implications. Thomas had never trusted Miller. He'd called him a bully with a badge, a man who preyed on the weak. She had dismissed it as Thomas's general distrust of authority, a sentiment common among men who had seen the brutalities of the war. Now, she saw the truth. Thomas hadn't been cynical. He had been perceptive. "What does he want?" Clara asked, looking at Lily, truly seeing her for the first time not as a child, but as a survivor. "Your father. What did you take from him?" Lily stopped her pacing and moved to the sewing basket. She hesitated for a second, her gaze meeting Clara's, a silent question passing between them. With a small, decisive nod, Clara gave her permission. Lily reached into the basket and pulled out the oilskin packet, her hands surprisingly steady. She unwrapped the map and spread it on the table between them. "This," she said, "this is what he wants." Clara looked at the crude drawing, the faded lines and cryptic symbols. "I don't understand. It's just a map. It's my mother's," Lily said, her voice softening, a deep well of sorrow opening in her eyes. "She drew it before I was born. My father, he wasn't always like this. After the war, he was different. Lost. He met my mother, and for a while, she was his anchor. But the darkness in him was too strong. He fell in with a bad crowd, men who saw his anger and his skill with a gun as useful. She traced a line on the map with her finger. My mother knew he was lost to her. Before she died, she gave this to me. She said it was a map to a new beginning, a place where we could be safe, where the gold of the earth could buy us a life away from him. Gold, the word hung in the air, heavy with promise and peril. Clara looked from Lily's earnest, tear-filled eyes to the tattered parchment. This wasn't just a treasure hunt. It was a legacy, a mother's desperate hope for her child's freedom. The emotional weight of the secret settled over Clara, cementing her resolve. This was no longer just about offering shelter. It was about honoring a dying mother's wish. Her gaze fell back to the map, her eyes scanning the landmarks. The drawing was rough, but the geography was unmistakable. Sorrow's Peak was the local name for the highest mountain and the ridge that bordered her property. Her eyes followed the path from the peak downwards, past the sketch of a waterfall she recognized from a nearby creek, to a trio of jagged rocks. Then her breath caught. Near the bottom of the map, marking what seemed to be a key location, was a drawing of a crooked tree, a gnarled, twisted pine, split by lightning years ago. It stood less than half a mile from her cabin. She passed it every time she rode the southern trail to check her fences. The gold wasn't just in the mountains. It was here, on her land, or so close it made no difference. The danger wasn't just at her door. It was woven into the very fabric of the world she had built with Thomas. He doesn't know where it leads, Lily said, misinterpreting Clara's shocked silence. My mother never told him. He only knows it's a map to a fortune, and that I have it. He thinks I'm going to run to it, use it to escape him for good. And you were, Clara stated, a quiet certainty in her voice. Lily nodded. I was going to wait for a thaw, then head into the mountains. I didn't know. Her voice trailed off. She didn't know the prize she was seeking was just beyond the tree line of the very cabin where she'd found refuge. The storm began to break in the early hours of the morning. The wind died down, and the relentless snowfall softened to a gentle flurry before stopping altogether. A profound, almost unnerving silence descended, broken only by the drip of melting snow from the eaves. The world outside was a pristine, unbroken canvas of white, beautiful, and treacherous. The end of the storm was not a relief, it was a threat. It meant the trails would soon be passable. It meant Miller and Silas could return. They spent the day in a state of quiet, hyper-vigilant tension. They took turns watching from the window while the other rested or prepared food. Every snap of a branch, every rustle in the trees sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through them. Late in the afternoon, Clara was standing watch when she saw it. A set of fresh tracks in the snow near the edge of the woods. They weren't the deep tracks of Miller's heavy horse, nor were they the familiar prints of deer or elk. These were from a single man on foot, moving carefully along the tree line, circling the cabin. He had been close enough to see the smoke from her chimney. Someone's been out there, she said, her voice low. Lily joined her at the window, her face paling as she saw the tracks. One of his men, she whispered. He sent someone to watch us, to make sure I don't run. The feeling of being watched, of being penned in, was suffocating. Clara felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp, cutting through her fear. This was her home. Thomas had built it with his own hands. She would not be terrorized on her own land. We can't just wait for them to come back, she said, her decision solidifying as she spoke. We have to be ready. For the rest of the day, they prepared. Clara brought the Winchester down from the mantel, her hands surprisingly steady as she checked the ammunition. She showed Lily how to load and fire it, the girl's small frame struggling with the rifle's weight but her eyes holding a grim determination. They barred the back door with a heavy log from the woodpile and stacked furniture against the lower half of the windows, creating makeshift fortifications. They were two women, one barely an adult, against a gang of ruthless men and a corrupt sheriff, but they would not be easy prey. As twilight bled across the snow-covered landscape, casting long, blue shadows, they sat at the table. The map spread between them once more. The crooked tree, Clara said, her finger resting on the symbol. If the gold is there, we need to know. Knowledge is our only weapon right now. You mean go out there? Lily asked, her eyes wide. With them watching, they'll be expecting us to stay huddled in here. Waiting, Clara reasoned. They won't expect us to move toward the prize. We'll go after dark. The moon is new. The shadows will be deep. It was a desperate, reckless plan, born of a feeling that their only hope lay in seizing the initiative. As full darkness fell, they bundled up in their warmest clothes, the rifle in Clara's hands, a small shovel and a lantern tucked into a pack on Lily's back. Just as they were about to unbolt the door, a sound from outside froze them in place. It wasn't a knock, it wasn't the wind, it was the soft, unmistakable whinny of a horse, just beyond the barn. It was answered by another, closer this time, from the edge of the woods. They weren't just being watched anymore. Silas and his men were out there, closing in, their patience clearly at an end. Clara and Lily exchanged a look of pure terror. They were trapped. The hunters had surrounded their prey, and the cabin was no longer a fortress. It was about to become a tomb. The whinny of the horses was answered by a low, cruel chuckle from the darkness just beyond the reach of the cabin's lamplight. Clara and Lily stood frozen, the warmth of the hearth a feeble defense against the cold dread seeping through the log walls. The world shrank to the size of that small, fortified room, the air thick with the scent of fear and burning pine. "Lily Lark," a voice drawled from the night, a sound that was half caress, half threat. "I know you're in there. Your pa has come all this way to bring you home. No need to be shy." Lily's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a whimper. Her face, illuminated by the flickering lantern, was a mask of pure terror. "That's him," she breathed, her eyes locking with Clara's. "That's Silas." Clara moved to the nearest window, peering through the narrow gap they had left above the stacked furniture. In the stark, snow-reflected moonlight, she could make out at least 4 figures on horseback, their forms dark and menacing against the white landscape. They weren't rushing the cabin. They were taking their time, savoring the moment, confident in their power. "Widow Benson," Silas's voice called out again, sharper this time. "You've got no part in this. This is a family matter. Send the girl out, and we'll be on our way. No harm need come to you or your property." Clara's knuckles were white where she gripped the Winchester. Every instinct screamed at her to stay hidden, to be silent. But the memory of Thomas, of his quiet courage in the face of his illness, stirred something within her. This was her home. She would not be a coward within its walls. "She's not going anywhere," Clara shouted back, her voice stronger than she expected, carrying clearly in the still, cold air. "She's under my protection." A moment of silence followed, then a burst of rough laughter from the men. "Protection?" Silas mocked. "An old rifle and a prayer? That's not protection, ma'am. That's a prelude to a funeral." He paused, letting the threat hang in the air. "I'm a reasonable man. I'll give you 5 minutes to reconsider your position. After that, my associates tend to get impatient. 5 minutes." The deadline was a lit fuse. Clara backed away from the window, her mind racing. They were trapped. The doors were barred, the windows barricaded. But it was a flimsy defense against determined men with guns and no conscience. She looked at Lily, who was trembling so violently she could barely stand. Fear was a poison, and it was quickly overwhelming them. Then, an image flashed in Clara's mind. A memory so deeply buried in the fog of grief she had almost forgotten it. Thomas, the winter before he died, his face flushed with a secretive pride. "Every man needs a bolt hole, Clara," he had said, standing on the bearskin rug in the center of the room. "A way out when there is no way out." The root cellar. It wasn't just a cellar for storing preserves and winter vegetables. Thomas, ever the pragmatist, ever the man who had seen the chaos of the war, had spent weeks digging a narrow tunnel from the back of the cellar. It was a claustrophobic, dirt-walled passage that emerged 50 yards away, hidden in the dense thicket of willows that lined the creek bed. He had called it his folly, his provision against a fire or a raid that would likely never come. Clara's heart began to pound with a new, frantic rhythm, not of fear, but of hope. "Lily," she said, her voice a sharp whisper that cut through the girl's panic. "The rug. Help me move it." Lily stared at her, uncomprehending. "What?" "The root cellar," Clara said, already pulling at the heavy bearskin. "There's a way out." Understanding dawned on Lily's face, and she scrambled to help. Together, they dragged the heavy rug aside, revealing the square trapdoor with its simple iron ring. It was their only chance, a desperate gamble that offered a slim path to survival. But how could they get there without being seen? The outlaws had the cabin surrounded. As if in answer, a new sound split the night, a sharp crack, followed by the whoosh of spreading flames. An angry orange light bloomed against the windows, casting the cabin's interior in a hellish glow. "The barn!" Lily cried, rushing to the window. Clara joined her, her stomach twisting into a knot of sickness and fury. Flames were devouring the structure that held their winter hay, their few precious tools, the empty stall where their milk cow had once stood. It was more than a building, it was a monument to Thomas's labor, a symbol of their future. Silas was sending a message. He would burn their world down around them to get what he wanted. The fire raged, the heat palpable even through the thick cabin walls. The shouts of the men outside grew louder, their excitement fueled by the destruction. Clara watched the flames lick at the winter sky, and in the midst of her rage, she saw their opportunity. The fire was a distraction. All eyes would be on the burning barn, on the front of the cabin, waiting for them to be smoked out like terrified rabbits. No one would be watching the dense, dark thicket by the creek. The roar of the fire and the crackling of timber would cover the sound of their escape. "Now," Clara said, her voice a low, urgent command. "This is our chance. Grab your satchel. Take only what you can carry." She moved quickly, stuffing a small loaf of bread and a canteen of water into a canvas bag. She slung the Winchester over her shoulder, its weight a grim reassurance. Lily grabbed her satchel, her movements swift and certain now that action had replaced terror. Clara knelt and pulled on the iron ring. The trapdoor, swollen with winter damp, resisted for a moment, then groaned open, releasing a wave of cool, earthy air. Below, a small ladder descended into blackness. "Go," Clara urged, pushing Lily toward the opening. "I'll be right behind you." The roar of the fire was louder now, a hungry beast consuming everything Thomas had built. The heat was beginning to seep through the floorboards. Outside, Silas's voice rose above the din, impatient and cruel. "Time's up, widow! Send out the girl, or the cabin's next." Lily didn't hesitate. She swung her legs into the opening and disappeared into the darkness. Clara took one last look around the small cabin, at the rocking chair where she had spent countless lonely nights, at the hearth that had been the heart of their home, at the faint scent of Thomas's pipe tobacco that she sometimes imagined still lingered in the air. Then, with a final, wrenching goodbye, she followed Lily into the earth, pulling the heavy trapdoor closed above them, plunging them into absolute, suffocating darkness. The sound of the world above, the fire, the wind, the shouts of angry men, was suddenly muffled, distant. They were alone, two fugitives in the belly of the earth, with only a desperate hope and a dead man's secret to guide them. The darkness in the root cellar was absolute, a thick, smothering blanket that swallowed sound and sight. The air was cold and damp, smelling of rich earth, potatoes, and the faint, sweet scent of last autumn's apples. Above them, the muffled thud of boots on the floorboards and the triumphant shouts of Silas's men were a terrifying reminder of their proximity to capture. "This way," Clara whispered, her voice a disembodied sound in the blackness. Her hand fumbled in the canvas bag, fingers closing around the familiar shape of a matchbox. With a trembling strike, a tiny flame bloomed, pushing back the oppressive dark. In the flickering light, Lily's face was a pale oval, her eyes wide with a fear that mirrored Clara's own. The cellar was small, its dirt walls lined with shelves holding jars of preserves, ghosts of summers past. At the back, behind a stack of empty crates, was the opening Thomas had dug. It was little more than a ragged hole, just wide enough for a person to crawl through on their hands and knees. "Stay close behind me," Clara instructed, handing the precious lantern to Lily. "And, for God's sake, don't let the light go out." She got down on her hands and knees and crawled into the tunnel. The passage was even narrower than she remembered, the packed earth pressing in on all sides. The air grew colder, and the muffled sounds from the cabin above faded, replaced by the scuttling of unseen things in the darkness and the frantic drumming of her own heart. It was a grave. They were crawling through their own grave. Behind her, she could hear Lily's ragged breathing and the soft scrape of the girl's body against the tunnel walls. The small circle of light from the lantern bobbed and swayed, a fragile beacon in the suffocating black. The tunnel seemed to stretch on for an eternity, a test of will against the rising tide of claustrophobia. Tree roots, like skeletal fingers, protruded from the ceiling, snagging their hair and clothes. Just as Clara felt her resolve begin to crumble, she saw it, a faint, almost imperceptible lightening of the darkness ahead. A few more feet, and she could feel a draft of clean, cold night air on her face. With a final, desperate push, she scrambled out of the tunnel's mouth and into the dense, snow-laden willows by the creek. She lay for a moment on the frozen ground, gasping in the sharp, frigid air, the stars a brilliant, dizzying canopy above. Lily emerged a moment later, her face smudged with dirt, her body trembling with a mixture of cold and relief. She set the lantern down, its light casting long, dancing shadows through the tangled branches. From their hidden vantage point, they could see the homestead. The barn was now a roaring pyre, sending a column of sparks and smoke into the night sky. The outlaws, silhouetted against the blaze, were moving toward the cabin, their forms dark and predatory. One of them kicked open the front door, and two others followed him inside. "They think we're still in there," Lily whispered, her voice choked with horror. Clara's heart ached with a fury so intense it burned away her fear. They were desecrating her home, the sanctuary she had shared with Thomas. But her anger was a cold, clarifying force. It sharpened her senses, focused her mind. "They'll realize we're gone soon enough," she said, her voice a low, steady whisper. "And when they do, they'll look for tracks. The creek is our only chance. The water will hide our trail." The creek was a ribbon of black, icy water flowing between snow-covered banks. Stepping into it felt like plunging a knife into her flesh. The cold was a physical blow, stealing her breath and driving deep into her bones. Lily cried out as the frigid water swirled around her knees, but she didn't falter, her hand gripping Clara's for support. They moved slowly, painfully, their feet numb and clumsy on the slick, uneven creek bed. The darkness, which had been their enemy in the tunnel, was now their ally, concealing them from the men who were surely beginning to realize their prey had vanished. Above the gurgle of the creek, they could hear angry shouts from the direction of the cabin. They had been discovered. For what felt like hours, they waded through the paralyzing cold, moving downstream, away from the homestead. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every snap of a twig sent a fresh wave of terror through them. Finally, when Clara felt she could go no further, when the cold had seeped so deeply into her that she could no longer feel her own limbs, she spotted a landmark through the trees, a familiar outcropping of rock that marked the edge of her property. "This way," she gasped, her teeth chattering uncontrollably. "We have to get out of the water." They scrambled up the steep, snowy bank, their frozen clothes crackling, their bodies shaking with violent, uncontrollable shivers. They were exposed now, their trail clear in the snow. They had to find shelter. And soon, the cold was as deadly an enemy as Silas Blackwood. It was Lily who spotted it, a shallow overhang of rock, a hollowed-out space at the base of a granite cliff, barely visible in the darkness. It wasn't much, but it offered protection from the wind. They huddled together in the small space, a miserable, shivering heap of shared desperation. Clara fumbled with the matches, her fingers stiff and useless. After several agonizing attempts, a small flame sputtered to life. They used the last of their dry kindling and a few pages torn from a small book in Lily's satchel to start a tiny, almost smokeless fire. It was a pathetic defense against the biting cold, but its warmth was life itself. As the first hints of dawn began to gray the eastern sky, they took stock of their situation. They were alive, but they were fugitives on their own land, with no food beyond the single loaf of bread, no shelter but a shallow cave, and enemies who were surely scouring the countryside for them. "We have to go for the gold," Lily said, her voice raspy, her face etched with a grim determination that made her look far older than her years. "It's our only chance. If we can get it, we can buy passage away from here. Start new somewhere they'll never find us." Clara looked at the girl, seeing the desperate hope in her eyes. The crooked tree was less than a mile from their current position, a grueling trek through deep snow and rugged terrain, but possible. The map, now their only real possession of value, was a beacon of hope in a sea of despair. "Even if we find it," Clara said, forcing herself to be practical. "What then? How do we carry it? How do we get it to a place where we can use it?" "One step at a time," Lily replied, echoing a sentiment Clara herself had once embraced. "First, we find it. Then, we figure out the rest." The logic was undeniable. Their survival depended on that map, on the hope it represented. As the sun rose, casting a pale, unforgiving light on the snow-covered landscape, they ate a few mouthfuls of the frozen bread and prepared to move out. Clara reloaded the Winchester, the metallic click of the cartridge sliding into the chamber, a small, reassuring sound in the vast, silent wilderness. They moved like ghosts through the forest, sticking to the shadows, their senses on high alert. The world was beautiful in its post-storm tranquility, the snow a pristine blanket, the air crisp and clean. But for Clara and Lily, it was a landscape of menace, every tree a potential hiding place for their pursuers. They found the crooked tree in a small, sheltered clearing, its twisted branches stark against the blue sky. It looked exactly as it had on the map, a silent, ancient sentinel guarding its secret. According to the drawing, the cache was buried at the base of the tree, on the side marked by a peculiar, crescent-shaped scar on the trunk. They began to dig, using the small shovel and their own half-frozen hands to claw at the icy, unyielding earth. The work was brutal, their progress agonizingly slow. Every few minutes, they would stop, listening, their ears straining for any sound of pursuit. After nearly an hour of back-breaking labor, the shovel struck something hard with a dull thud. A new, frantic energy surged through them. They dug faster, their breath coming in ragged gasps, until they uncovered the top of a small, iron-bound chest, rusted and ancient. It was real, Lily's mother's promise. Her legacy was real. They worked together to pry the heavy chest from the frozen ground, their hearts pounding with a mixture of triumph and trepidation. The lock was rusted shut, but a few well-aimed blows with the shovel broke it open. With a final, desperate heave, they lifted the lid. For a moment, they just stared, their breath catching in their throats. The chest was filled to the brim, not with coins or bars, but with raw, unrefined gold nuggets, their dull gleam a testament to a fortune beyond their wildest imaginings. A twig snapped behind them. Clara whirled around, bringing the Winchester to her shoulder in a single, fluid motion. Lily scrambled behind her, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a scream. Stepping out from behind a large boulder, a smug, triumphant smile on his face, was Sheriff Miller. He held a pistol in his hand, its barrel aimed directly at Clara's heart. Well, he said, his voice oozing with false admiration. I have to admit, ladies, I'm impressed. You led us right to it. From the trees behind him, Silas Blackwood and two of his men emerged, their faces alight with greedy anticipation. They had been watching, waiting, letting their quarry do the hard work for them. The map, the gold. It's all mine now, Silas declared, his eyes fixed on the open chest. And as for you two, he let his gaze drift from Clara to Lily, a cruel, predatory gleam in his eyes. Loose ends are so untidy. The clearing was silent, save for the whisper of the wind through the pines and the harsh, ragged sound of Clara's own breathing. Sheriff Miller's pistol was a black, unblinking eye, its gaze fixed on her. Behind him, Silas Blackwood and his men spread out, their rifles held loosely but ready, their grins a chilling mixture of avarice and menace. Every escape route was cut off. The forest that had been their refuge was now the wall of their trap. Clara's arms ached from the weight of the Winchester, but she didn't lower it. Her mind, sharpened by adrenaline, worked with a cold, desperate clarity. They were outnumbered, outgunned. A direct confrontation would be suicide, but surrender meant a different kind of death, one she was no longer willing to accept. She had come too far, fought too hard, to let it end here. You've been played, Sheriff, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. She kept her eyes locked on Miller, recognizing him as the immediate, pivotal threat. Silas was the leader, but Miller was the one with the badge, the one who gave their lawlessness a veneer of legitimacy. Silas has no intention of sharing this with you. He'll kill you the moment our bodies are cold. Miller's smile wavered for a fraction of a second. The girl's got spirit, he said to Silas, trying to regain his footing. A shame we have to put it out. She's right, Lily's voice, small but clear, piped up from behind Clara. She peeked out from behind Clara's shoulder, her gaze fixed on the sheriff. My father doesn't share. He takes. That's all he knows how to do. He'll put a bullet in your back and tell the town you died a hero. Trying to apprehend us. Silas chuckled, a low, guttural sound. Smart girl, a Blackwood through and through. But she's wrong about one thing, Miller. I always pay my partners. He took a step forward, his eyes gleaming as he looked at the chest of gold. And you've been a very good partner indeed. It was a masterful manipulation. Silas was playing them against each other, sowing doubt while reinforcing his alliance with Miller. Clara saw the sheriff's confidence solidify. Her gamble had failed. "It's over, Clara," Miller said, his voice hardening. "Put the rifle down." Slowly, Clara's mind raced, searching for an alternative, a final, desperate move. She thought of Thomas, of his unwavering belief in her strength. She thought of Lily's mother, of the hope she had buried with this chest of gold. She could not fail them. Then, she saw it, a detail she had noticed earlier but dismissed as irrelevant. The snow on the branches of the towering pine tree directly above Silas and his men was unusually heavy, a thick, unstable-looking cornice that had built up during the blizzard. The morning sun, now higher in the sky, was beginning to warm the clearing. It was a long shot, a 1 in a million chance. But it was the only one they had. "All right, Sheriff," she said, her voice laced with a resignation she did not feel. "You win." She began to lower the Winchester, her movements slow and deliberate. The outlaws relaxed, their grins widening in triumph. Silas took another step toward the chest, his attention completely focused on the gleaming prize. Miller's pistol dipped slightly. In that instant of distraction, Clara swung the rifle back up, not at the men, but at the thick, snow-laden branch high above their heads. She fired. The shot cracked through the quiet clearing, a sharp, definitive sound. The bullet ripped through the base of the branch, shattering the fragile hold of the snow. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then, with a deep groan, the branch gave way, and a literal avalanche of heavy, wet snow cascaded down. It wasn't a landslide, but it was enough. The sheer volume and weight of the snow hit the outlaws with the force of a physical blow, burying them in a disorienting, suffocating wave of white. Rifles were knocked from hands. Men were thrown off balance, their triumphant shouts turning to cries of shock and rage. "Run!" Clara screamed, grabbing Lily's arm and pulling her toward the dense cover of the forest on the far side of the clearing. They scrambled through the deep snow, their lungs burning, not daring to look back. Behind them, they could hear the furious, muffled shouts of Silas and his men as they struggled to free themselves from the snow. They ran until their legs gave out, until the sounds of their pursuers had faded, replaced by the pounding of their own blood in their ears. They finally collapsed in a sheltered ravine, hidden from view, their bodies shaking with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. Did we get away?" Lily gasped, her breath coming in ragged sobs. "For now," Clara said, reloading the Winchester with trembling hands. "But they'll come after us, and they'll be angry." They knew they couldn't rest for long. Silas was a skilled tracker, and their trail in the snow was a clear invitation. As they huddled together, trying to catch their breath, Clara's mind was already working, formulating the next, desperate step in their fight for survival. "The homestead," she said, a new, audacious plan taking shape. "We have to go back." Lily stared at her as if she had lost her mind. "Back? But they'll be looking for us there." "Exactly," Clara said, a grim smile touching her lips. "They'll be expecting us to run deeper into the mountains, away from town, away from help. They won't expect us to double back, to move toward the danger." It was a counterintuitive, high-stakes gamble, but it felt right. Their small cabin, with its hidden tunnel and its familiarity, was the only place they had a real chance of making a stand. The journey back was a grueling ordeal. They circled wide, avoiding their own tracks, moving through the densest parts of the forest. The sun was setting by the time they reached the ridge overlooking the homestead, casting the valley in long, ominous shadows. The scene below was one of devastation. The barn was a smoldering, skeletal ruin. The cabin, though still standing, had been ransacked, its door hanging broken on its hinges. But there was no sign of the outlaws. They had clearly given chase, assuming their quarry had fled into the high country. Clara and Lily slipped down to the cabin like ghosts in the twilight, their movements swift and silent. Inside, the destruction was heartbreaking. Furniture was overturned, shelves were swept clean, and the precious jars of preserves lay shattered on the floor, their contents a sticky, mournful mess. They had taken everything of value, leaving only chaos and despair in their wake. But they had missed one thing. In her haste to fortify the cabin, Clara had overlooked the small, hidden compartment Thomas had built into the hearthstone, a place where he kept a spare pistol and a box of cartridges. Clara knelt and pried the stone loose. The pistol was there, oiled and ready. It wasn't much, but it was another weapon, another small piece of hope. As she checked the gun, Lily, who had been searching her own meager belongings, let out a small cry. "My satchel," she said, her voice thick with despair. "It's gone. I must have dropped it in the clearing when we ran." Clara's heart sank. The satchel held more than just Lily's few possessions. It held the locket, the wooden bird, the last tangible connections to her parents. But more importantly, it was a clue. Silas would find it, and it would confirm that they were unarmed, save for the single rifle. He would believe they were at his mercy. "It's okay," Clara said, though it wasn't. "We have this now." She held up the pistol. "And we have the tunnel. We have a plan." As darkness fell, they made their final preparations. They didn't bother to right the furniture or clean the mess. Instead, they used the chaos to their advantage, creating a series of tripwires and booby traps from scattered debris. They propped the broken front door shut, making it look secured from the inside, but left the back door unlocked, a silent invitation. Then, they retreated to the root cellar, pulling the trapdoor almost shut, leaving only a tiny crack through which they could see the cabin's interior. They waited. The minutes stretched into an hour, then two. The silence of the ransacked cabin was a heavy, suffocating thing. Finally, they heard it, the soft crunch of boots on snow, the low murmur of voices. They had returned. Through the crack, Clara saw the back door ease open. Two of Silas's men slipped inside, their rifles at the ready. They moved cautiously through the trashed room, their satisfaction at the destruction evident in their cruel smiles. "Ain't here," one of them whispered. "Must have kept running." "Boss said to wait," the other replied. "Said they'd be back. They got nowhere else to go." The two men settled in, making themselves comfortable amidst the debris, clearly intending to wait for their prey to walk into the trap. From her hiding place, Clara's heart pounded. Her plan was working, but the most dangerous part was yet to come. Outside, she knew, Silas and Miller would be waiting, covering the front of the cabin. She and Lily had one chance, one narrow path to survival, and it lay through the very men who were hunting them. She looked at Lily, whose face was a pale smudge in the darkness, and gave a small, reassuring nod. She chambered around in the Winchester, the sound a soft, deadly click in the silence of the cellar. The final act was about to begin. The hours ticked by, each one a small eternity. Above them, the two outlaws grew careless, their low conversation occasionally punctuated by a swig from a hidden flask. Finally, just as the first hint of dawn began to lighten the sky, the moment came. The two men, lulled into a false sense of security, were dozing by the dying embers of the fire. With a silent prayer, Clara pushed the trapdoor open. She rose from the cellar like a specter of vengeance, the Winchester leveled and steady. "Drop them," she commanded, her voice a low, hard command that cut through the quiet. The men jerked awake, their eyes wide with disbelief. One of them, still groggy, made a move for his rifle. Clara fired a single, deafening shot, the bullet splintering the floorboards an inch from his hand. He froze, his hands flying into the air. "Now," Clara said to Lily, who had emerged behind her, the small pistol held in a surprisingly steady two-handed grip. "The back door, quickly!" As Lily slipped out into the pre-dawn gray, Clara backed away, her rifle never wavering from the two stunned outlaws. "Don't even think about it," she warned, before disappearing through the doorway and bolting it from the outside with a heavy iron bar they had salvaged from the barn. They were in the open now, but they had a head start. The sounds of their escape, the gunshot, the shouts of the trapped men, had alerted Silas and Miller at the front of the cabin. Clara and Lily ran, not for the woods this time, but for the one place their pursuers would never expect, the smoldering ruins of the barn. They scrambled into the blackened, skeletal remains of the structure just as Silas and Sheriff Miller rounded the corner of the cabin, their faces contorted with rage. "There they are!" Miller shouted, raising his pistol, but he was too late. From the shadows of the ruined barn, Clara and Lily opened fire. Their shots were not aimed to kill, but to pin their enemies down. A bullet from the Winchester ripped through the sleeve of Silas's coat. Another from Lily's pistol kicked up a spray of snow at Miller's feet. The two men dove for cover behind a snow-covered woodpile. The tables had turned. The hunters were now the hunted. The standoff was tense, the air filled with the sharp crack of gunfire and the acrid smell of gunpowder. Clara and Lily were protected by the charred timbers of the barn, while Silas and Miller were pinned down, unable to advance without exposing themselves. "You can't stay in there forever, widow," Silas roared. "You're out of ammunition soon enough." He was right. Clara knew their supply was limited. This was a battle they could not win, only survive long enough for a miracle. And then, the miracle came. It wasn't the cavalry or a posse of righteous townsfolk. It was a single, unexpected sound from the direction of the main trail, the clear, sharp ring of a blacksmith's hammer on an anvil. It was a signal, a prearranged alarm she and Thomas had devised with their nearest neighbor, old Jedediah Smith, a reclusive but decent man who lived 5 miles down the valley. 3 sharp rings meant dire trouble. Someone had heard the gunshots. Someone was calling for help. The sound seemed to change the calculus for Silas and Miller. They exchanged a look, a silent communication of shared desperation. Help was coming. Their time was running out. With a final, furious volley of shots toward the barn, they broke from cover and ran for their horses. They galloped away, disappearing into the woods just as the sun broke over the horizon, casting the devastated homestead in a cold, clean light. Clara and Lily remained in the ruins of the barn, the rifle and pistol still clutched in their hands, until the sound of approaching riders, real help this time, grew loud and clear. They had survived. They had fought back, and against all odds, they had won. As the posse of neighbors, led by Jedediah, rode into the yard, Clara felt the last of her strength give way. She sank to the ground, the Winchester slipping from her grasp, the weight of their ordeal finally crashing down on her. Lily knelt beside her, wrapping her in a fierce, protective embrace. They clung to each other, 2 survivors in the ruins of a home. The rising sun a promise of a new, uncertain day. The gold was still out there, but for the first time, Clara realized the true treasure wasn't buried under a crooked tree. It was the fierce, resilient spirit she had discovered within herself, and the unbreakable bond she had forged with the outlaw's daughter.